They say an Omega can't break a man. But I've watched the most feared alpha in the Northern Territories stand in the ash of everything he built. Crown gone, pack bleeding out around him, every warrior he trained lying face down in the dirt. And the only thing still standing was the woman he spent 3 years treating like she was less than the mud on his boots. Here's what nobody tells you about power. Sometimes it doesn't roar. Sometimes it waits. Drop your city in the comments. Stay until the end. You're going to want to see what she does with it. So, the morning it started, the morning everything cracked open like old bone, Selene Vera was on her knees. Not in prayer, not in defeat. On her knees because the grout between the Great Hall's stone floor had gone black with mildew, and if it wasn't scrubbed white before the Luna's inspection, someone was going to bleed for it. Probably her. She'd been at it since before the sun cleared the ridge. Her hands had gone past pain into that dull underwater numbness that comes when the body stops complaining and just works. The brush handle had split 2 weeks ago, and nobody replaced it, so she gripped the raw wood and pushed through the splinters the same way she pushed through everything, without ceremony, without the luxury of stopping. The great hall smelled like tallow candles and the faint, sour ghost of last night's feast. Bones still scattered near the far wall where the pack's high-ranking warriors had thrown them. Nobody cleaned up after themselves here. That was what Omegas were for. Selene moved the brush in tight, grinding circles. Her hair, dark, uncut, pulled back with a strip of leather she'd found in a refuse pile, hung damp against the back of her neck. Her knees, even through the rough cloth she'd wrapped around them, pressed against stone that held the cold of deep winter, even in the middle of the year. There was a bruise on her left hip from yesterday, and one forming on her right forearm from the day before that, and somewhere beneath her ribs lived a permanent ache she'd stopped trying to name. She had learned a long time ago not to catalog pain. You catalog pain, and you start doing math. You start doing math, and you realize how much you've lost. She couldn't afford the arithmetic. The hall was empty at this hour. That was the only gift the early morning gave her. Absence of witnesses. No warriors swaggering past, pretending not to look. No kitchen girls sneering from the corridor. Just her and the stone, and the rhythmic violence of the brush against the floor, and the cold, and the silence that she had, against all odds, learned to live inside of like a second skin. She was almost to the far end of the hall when she heard the door. Not the main doors. The side passage. The one that connected the hall to the Alpha's private wing. Selene didn't stop scrubbing. She didn't look up. She had learned that looking up was an invitation, and invitations from this direction never ended well. Heavy footsteps. 2 sets. She recognized one by weight alone. Kael Draven moved like a man who had never once, in his entire life, questioned whether a room would accommodate him. Not arrogance exactly, or maybe it was arrogance so deep it had become architecture, something structural in the way he occupied space. He was 28. He had taken the Alpha title at 22 after his father's death, had held it for 6 years against challenges from 3 different packs, had never lost a fight that anyone who was still alive could name. He stood 6'4" and moved with the coiled, deliberate ease of something that didn't need to hurry because nothing it wanted would dare run. The second set of footsteps belonged to his beta, Castor Rhine. Older, heavier, voice like gravel soaked in creek water. They stopped walking. Selene kept scrubbing. "She's at it early." Castor's voice. Not directed at her, directed at the Alpha, as if she were furniture under discussion. "She's always at it early." Kyle. Flat. Neither contempt nor interest, just observation, the way you'd note that rain was wet. Selene moved the brush forward 3 inches. The grout here was particularly bad, a dark seam of grime that had probably been building since before she arrived. She put her shoulder into it. "Luna wants the East Corridor done before midday," Castor said. "She's hosting the River Pack delegation at noon. Then make sure it gets done." "Already told the head servant she's—" A pause. "She'll manage it." A silence stretched. Selene could feel it without looking, the kind of silence that preceded a decision. "Her hands are bleeding," Kael said. It wasn't concern. She knew the difference. It was the same tone a man uses when he notices a plow horse favoring one leg. Not because the horse's pain matters, but because a lame horse is an inefficient horse. "She'll manage," Castor said again. The footsteps resumed and moved past her and out through the main doors. And Celine Vera kept scrubbing, and the blood from the split on her right palm ran into the gray water in the bucket and swirled there for a moment before it dissolved into nothing. That was the shape of her days. She had been in Black Hollow for 3 years. She had come the way all unclaimed Omegas eventually came to large packs. Through necessity, through the collapse of something else, through the absence of better options. Her mother's small outer settlement had been absorbed into Black Hollow's territory after a border dispute. Her mother was 3 years dead. The settlement's few remaining people had scattered. Celine had stayed because there was nowhere left to go, and because leaving Black Hollow's territory without Alpha permission was a sentence that ended in blood. She had been given the lowest rank a wolf could hold, Omega servant. Below the kitchen staff, below the stable hands, below, technically, the pack's animals, who at least had no assigned labor. And then the rumors had started. She wasn't sure when. Somewhere in the first year. A wolf in the Eastern hunting party had broken his leg in a fall, and she had been nearby and she had done nothing, had not touched him, had not spoken, had only been present, and the leg had set clean overnight when it should have taken 3 weeks. Someone had noticed. And then there was the incident near the river, the wolf pup that had been running a killing fever, and Celine had walked past the tent where the pup lay dying and the fever had broken by morning. And then the old she-wolf in the northern quarters who had gone blind in one eye after a rogue's attack, who recovered her sight so suddenly she claimed she'd seen a face in her sleep, a face with a mark like burning silver. Celine hadn't done anything. She never did anything. But she was present. She was always present. And in a pack like Black Hollow, where fear was the primary language and pattern recognition was survival, presence was enough. The rumors said she was cursed, that her blood attracted death, that healing happened not because of her, but in spite of her, some perverse trick of dark luck that would eventually collect what it was owed. Luna Seraphine, who had arrived at Black Hollow 18 months ago on the arm of a trade alliance and had been clawing her way toward alpha mate status ever since, had seized the narrative with both manicured hands. "Cursed blood," the Luna said at high table, loudly enough to carry. "We let that thing walk among us and wonder why the season's been hard." Nobody contradicted her. Kael had said nothing. In Celine's experience, alpha silence was its own form of verdict. She finished the Great Hall by the time the kitchen fires were lit. She moved to the East Corridor. She moved through it methodically, section by section, hands long past the point of feeling. The pack began to wake around her. Wolves heading to morning meal, warriors crossing toward the training yard, servants moving in the quick, apologetic shuffle that this house imposed on everyone without rank. She became invisible, which was its own skill. Make yourself small enough and people stop seeing you as a thing they need to interact with and start seeing you as part of the background, and the background doesn't get hit, usually. She was wringing out her bucket at the East Corridor's end when 2 junior warriors rounded the corner. She recognized them. Bren and Sal, both 20, both the particular brand of stupid that comes with just enough size and status to feel invincible. They had the bright, unfinished faces of men who hadn't yet learned that the world would eventually break them. She stepped to the side to let them pass. Bren's shoulder caught hers anyway, deliberately. She knew the difference. The bucket went sideways. Gray water splashed across the stone she'd just cleaned, spread in a dark fan, soaked the hem of her work tunic. "Watch yourself," Bren said, without stopping, without looking back. Sal laughed. The sound bounced off the corridor walls and faded. Celine stood with the empty bucket in her hand and watched the dirty water settle into the stone seams. Her right hand throbbed. The split on her palm had opened again. She set the bucket down. She went back to the courtyard well. She filled it. She came back. She cleaned it again. This was not weakness. She had made that distinction very carefully, a long time ago, in the cold dark of her first winter here, when she had genuinely considered whether continuing was worth the arithmetic. Endurance was not surrender. Silence was not compliance. She was not here because she had given up. She was here because she had made a calculation, slow and ugly and without any comfort, about what survival required and what it cost and what she was willing to pay. The cost was high. She paid it daily. She kept the receipt. Around mid-morning, Luna Seraphine came through the East Corridor at the head of her small retinue. 3 women, all ranked, all expensive, all wearing the same carefully arranged expression of mild disgust that seemed to be the Luna's house style. Seraphine was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, precisely, with intent, with an edge to everything. Dark hair, pale skin, a jaw like something carved rather than born. She was 25 and had been born into a minor pax nobility and had spent every year since working to close the distance between minor and major. She moved through Black Hollow like she already owned it because she was, methodically, arranging for that to be true. Her eyes found Celine the way a hawk finds movement in grass. She stopped. Her retinue stopped. Celine straightened slowly from where she'd been crouched over a stubborn patch near the corridor's window alcove. She did not bow. That had been a miscalculation once. She had bowed on instinct early on, and Seraphine had made a point of it, had said loudly that an Omega who didn't know her place required correction. So Celine had stopped bowing to everyone except the Alpha, which was the technically correct protocol, which enraged Seraphine precisely because it was technically correct. "You missed a spot," Seraphine said. She hadn't. Celine had been over this section twice. "Where?" Celine said. The Luna's eyes narrowed. She did not like being asked to substantiate things. "There." She pointed vaguely at a 3-foot section of corridor. "I've already done that section." "Then do it again." One of Seraphine's retinue, a sandy-haired woman named Lyra, who was the least awful of the three, looked briefly uncomfortable before her face settled back into neutral. "I still have the west approach to finish before your noon delegation," Celine said. "Not a challenge, a logistical fact, stated plainly. Then you should work faster." Seraphine stepped forward, closing the distance to something that was meant to feel threatening. She smelled expensive, cedar and amber, and something faintly synthetic that Celine suspected was a compound used to enhance the appearance of a dominant wolf's scent. "You know what I find fascinating? In 3 years, every time something goes wrong in this house, a wolf gets sick, supplies go missing, a ceremony gets disrupted, you're always somewhere nearby, not at the center, never at the center, just present." Celine said nothing. "That bothers me," Seraphine said. "I know," Celine said. The Luna's expression shifted, something cold and very awake moving behind her eyes. She was not stupid. Celine had never made the mistake of thinking she was. "You should be very careful," Seraphine said quietly, "about how comfortable you let yourself get." "I'm not comfortable," Celine said. "I'm just here." Seraphine held the look for another 3 seconds. Then she moved on, and her retinue flowed past, and the corridor went quiet again. Celine turned back to the section of floor she'd already done twice. She picked up her brush. She did it a 3rd time. The west approach was finished by 11. She had been working for 6 hours. She had not eaten since the heel of bread she'd taken from the kitchen discard pile the night before. Her hands had progressed from numbness to a new kind of pain. Sharper, specific, the sort that suggests something is wrong at a cellular level. She ignored it. The preparation for the noon delegation meant the main house was full of movement. Riverpack had sent 4 representatives, all male, all running the careful, watchful diplomacy of wolves who weren't sure if they were guests or hostages. Black Hollow was the largest pack in 3 territories. Being invited to Black Hollow was an honor that had enough teeth in it to draw blood. Celine moved through the edges of this activity like water moves through rock, finding the path of least resistance, making no impression, passing through. She needed to return the cleaning equipment to the stores, eat something before evening, and then report to the head servant for the afternoon assignment, which she already knew would be the Alpha's secondary chamber, because one of the other Omega girls had whispered this morning that she'd seen Kael sleeping in the secondary chamber last night after some kind of argument, and that meant the bedding needed changing and the hearth cleaning and the whole room turning over before dark. She was almost to the stores when she heard the voice behind her. "You. Male. Young. Riverpack." She could tell by the accent, the way the vowels sat differently in the mouth. She stopped and turned. He was one of the Riverpack delegates. Mid-20s. Big, not as big as Kael, with the wide-set eyes and broad jaw of a river territory wolf. He was standing in the corridor looking at her with an expression she had trouble reading at first, then recognized as unguarded curiosity. Genuine, not predatory. "I'm not supposed to be down this corridor, am I?" he said. "No," she said. Right. He looked around, got his bearings. I'm looking for the meal hall. Someone gave me directions that made absolutely no sense. Second left, then the main corridor north. First right after the bronze fixture. He blinked. That's it? That's it. Thank you. He paused, looked at her hands. Not the way Kyle had. Not with the pragmatic inventory of a man assessing an asset. He looked the way someone looks when they actually see something. You're hurt. It's fine. That's not an answer to what I said. She looked at him. He wasn't being kind out of strategy. She'd learned to identify the difference. This was just a man who'd noticed something and said so. It happened outside of Black Hollow. She'd almost forgotten. I'm aware, she said. Thank you for the observation. He studied her for another moment with those wide-set eyes. What's your name? Second left, she said. Bronze fixture. First right. He held up both hands in concession, the ghost of something that might be a smile. He turned and followed her directions. She watched him go and felt something she didn't have a clean name for, a small, cold awareness that there were other ways to exist in the world, that it was possible to move through a corridor and be noticed as a person, and have the observation mean nothing complicated. She filed this away without sentiment. Sentiment was another form of arithmetic she couldn't afford. She returned the equipment. She found a kitchen discard, half a biscuit, and some cold broth someone had left near the back entrance. She ate it standing up, quickly, before anyone could make a point of it. She went to report to the head servant. The afternoon assignment was the secondary chamber. She'd expected it. The secondary chamber was in the Alpha's wing, accessible through a corridor guarded by two of Kyle's ranked warriors who knew her by sight and let her through without speaking, which was its own small mercy. The room was large, low-ceilinged, with a good stone hearth and a bed that took up most of the south wall. It smelled like the man who slept in it. Something dark and mineral, like river stone and cold smoke. She had been in this room before. She knew its geography without looking. She started with the hearth. Ash removal first, then the grate, then the fresh lay of wood for the evening. She moved efficiently and without thought, which was the only way to work in spaces that belonged to people who could end you. She was stripping the bed when the door opened. She did not startle. She had trained that out of herself in year 1. Cale Draven stood in the doorway. He was still in fighting clothes, the rough, close-cut gear he wore to the training yard, not the formal leather he wore for pack business. He'd been at it already. There was sweat dried to gray at his collar and a new cut along his left jaw, shallow, from a sparring partner who'd gotten close. He looked like he'd walked directly from the yard to this room without stopping. He stopped when he saw her. She kept pulling the sheets. She had learned that stopping was an acknowledgement of disruption, and acknowledging disruption gave people something to react to. She was a servant changing bedding. She would continue to be a servant changing bedding until someone told her otherwise. Didn't know you were in here, he said. I can come back, she said. A pause. No. She kept working. He came into the room, moved to the window, stood with his back to her, looking at the training yard below. She could hear the distant sounds of sparring from here, the crack of wood practice weapons, shouted corrections, the particular silence that follows a good throw. The room was quiet between them. She folded the sheet, set it aside, reached for the clean one. Her hands were bad in the afternoon light. She noticed him notice this from the reflection in the window glass. How long have your hands been like that? He said. A while, she said. Since when? I don't keep track. She could feel him looking at the reflection of her in the glass. He had a habit of this, looking at things sidelong, from an angle, as if direct observation cost something he was budgeting carefully. The Riverpack delegate asked about you, he said. The sheet settled across the bed. She smoothed it toward the far corner. About me specifically? He said he'd met a woman in the servant corridor, described you, asked who you were. She said nothing. I told him you were part of the household staff. That's accurate, she said. Another silence. The quality of Kyle's silences had always been different from other people's. Other people's silences were empty. His were occupied. Something moved behind them. You didn't tell him your name, he said. He didn't need it. He seemed to think he did. She tucked the far corner of the sheet under the mattress edge and straightened. She looked at him directly for the first time since he'd entered. only because she was done with the bed and moving to retrieve the pillow covers, and the path took her into his line of sight. He was watching her with an expression she had never successfully decoded in 3 years. It wasn't contempt. Contempt she knew, she'd cataloged all its varieties. It wasn't pity, which she'd have smelled from further away and liked less than contempt. It was something more complicated and less defined, like a man looking at a locked door and genuinely unsure whether he wants to know what's behind it. "The Luna is planning something," he said. Not to her. More like thinking aloud, testing words in the room's air. "For the mating ceremony." "That's in 2 weeks," she said. "Yes." She gathered the pillow covers. "Is that all you need from me?" He turned from the window and looked at her full on. This almost never happened. In 3 years, she could count on one hand the number of times Kyle Draven had looked at her directly, rather than past her or through her. "You never ask for anything," he said. "No," she agreed. "Why not?" She thought about this. Not performing thought, actually considering whether to answer and how, and what the answer would cost. "Because everything I've asked for got taken or denied," she said. "So I stopped asking and started doing. Turns out you can cover a lot of ground if you're not waiting on permission." He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, a movement she couldn't name. "That's either very strong or very broken," he said. "Could be both," she said. "Could be neither. Might just be practical." She moved to the door. She stopped because she had one more thing in her hand, the old pillowcase, the one that needed burning rather than washing. She turned back and set it on the chair near the hearth because she couldn't exit through his wing carrying damaged goods. It would raise questions from the warriors at the corridor end. "Celine," he said. She stopped, her back to him. It was the first time in 3 years he had said her name. "The River Pack delegate's name is Davon Ashcroft," Kale said. "His pack is small. His alpha is his uncle, and his uncle is in failing health. He'll be alpha inside a year. He came here looking for an alliance, and he left the delegation room to find a bathroom and walked 2 corridors out of his way to ask about a servant." She turned then. He was looking at her with that unreadable expression again. "That's information," he said. "I don't know what you'll do with it." She held his gaze for a moment. "Why are you telling me?" "I don't know," he said. He said it like a man who'd expected a different answer from himself. "I genuinely don't know." She left. She walked back through his wing, past the warriors who didn't speak, down the main corridor, and out into the cold afternoon. She walked across the back courtyard. She sat down on the far edge of the courtyard well, which was low to the ground and out of sight lines from the main windows, and she put her damaged hands in her lap and stared at the middle distance for 60 seconds. Then she got up and went to her next assignment. That night, the thing happened for the first time. She was in the servants' quarters, a long, low room off the east wing, shared by 6 women and 2 men, straw pallets and thin blankets, and a single iron brazier that spent half the winter putting out more smoke than heat. The others were already asleep. She lay on her back in the dark, hands aching, listening to the breathing of the room and the wind outside the narrow windows. She had been having the dreams more frequently. She didn't let herself think about them during the day. Daytime was for practical things, for survival math, for the narrow business of staying useful and staying intact. But at night, the borders went soft, and the dreams came in through the soft places. Always the same shape. A forest that wasn't quite the Hollows forest, older and deeper, where the trees had no names, and the dark between them had weight like water. And in the dream, she walked through this forest without fear, which was itself remarkable, because fear was the weather of her days. And things followed her in the dream, large and luminous, moving between the trees at the edges of vision, shapes that were too big to be wolves and too familiar to be monsters. And in the dream, her skin wasn't cold. In the dream, something burned just beneath the surface of it, steady and banked, like an ember that had been waiting a long time for the right fuel. She woke before dawn with the burning sensation still fading from her forearms. In the cold gray light, she rolled her sleeves back and looked. There were marks on her skin that hadn't been there the night before. Not bruises, not abrasions, marks. Lines, or something like lines, running in patterns she didn't have language for, from her wrist to mid-forearm. They were the color of ash, or almost no color at all, as if the skin had gone very slightly translucent and something beneath it had left an impression. They didn't hurt, That was the strange part. After weeks of hands that cataloged their damage in specific grinding detail, the marks on her forearms had no pain at all. They felt settled, like something that had always been there and had only just become visible. She pulled her sleeves down. She lay back and stared at the low ceiling until the room began to lighten and the others started waking, and she thought very carefully and deliberately about the east corridor that needed mopping before breakfast and the grain stores that required an inventory count and the dozen small tasks that constituted the day's survival math. She built them up around the marks on her arms like a wall. She was good at walls. 3 days later, the wolves came. Not the ancient wolves. That was later. That was the ceremony. That was the thing that cracked the world open for good. 3 days after the marks appeared, 2 of Black Hollow's mid-ranked warriors got into a fight in the main yard over something trivial and stupid. A slight, a debt. The way men find reasons to hit each other when the pressure has been building long enough. They were circling with drawn blades when Celine crossed the yard carrying a water yoke. She was taking the most direct route to the kitchen, which happened to cross the edge of the yard where the fight was happening. She did not stop. She did not change course. She walked across the periphery of the fight as if it were weather to be walked through rather than something requiring her opinion. The 2 warriors stopped, not for her. She told herself this clearly and without sentiment. They stopped because the pack hierarchy had observers now. 3 ranked wolves had emerged from the main hall at the noise, and the junior warriors would be stupid to continue. That was why they stopped. The timing was coincidence. But the bigger of the 2, a veteran named Garen, who she'd seen fight before and who did not stop for things easily, looked at her as she passed with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Not contempt, not the casual territorial response she'd learned to navigate. Something older and more confused, like a man who'd felt a sound he couldn't hear. She kept walking. The yoke was heavy. She'd been balancing it since year 1 and had long since developed the specific muscle adaptation it required, the way the weight settled across her shoulders, and the slight shift in gait that compensated. She crossed the yard. She went to the kitchen. She filled the water vessels that needed filling and moved on. Behind her, she heard the 2 warriors sheath their blades. That evening, Lyra, the least awful of Seraphine's retinue, found her in the back passage near the laundry and stopped with a visible hesitation that was different from the usual brand. Lyra was not stupid either. Celine had noted this over months and filed it without acting on it. Intelligent people in service to dangerous people tended to navigate very carefully, and Celine's policy was not to disrupt their calculations. "She's going to move against you before the ceremony," Lyra said. She said it fast, quietly, without making eye contact, as if the words were hot and she needed to put them down quickly. Celine kept folding. "Seraphine. She's been meeting with someone outside. Not Pack. I don't know who. How long?" "Weeks." Lyra's hands moved, a fidgeting she suppressed almost immediately, a micro-movement of anxiety. "There's something she's waiting for, a timeline. She wants you gone before Kael makes his declaration." Celine folded a cloth into thirds, then into thirds again. Set it on the pile. "Why are you telling me?" Lyra's jaw tightened. "Because I have a sister who was an Omega at Riverpack for 4 years before I got ranked. And because whatever you are, you're not what she says you are." She said this with the particular exhausted conviction of someone who has been watching injustice long enough to need to name it once, even if they can't fix it. Celine looked at her, held the look. "I'm not asking for your protection," Lyra said. "I can't." "I know," Celine said. "I'm not asking you for anything either." Lyra nodded. She walked away quickly and didn't look back. Celine stood in the back passage with her hands on the folded cloth pile and thought about timelines and ceremonies and the marks on her forearms that had been a shade darker this morning than they were last night. She thought about Kael's voice saying her name for the first time in 3 years. She thought about the Riverpack man with the wide-set eyes who had looked at her hands and said, "That's not an answer to what I said." She thought about the forest in her dreams and the weight of the dark between the trees and the things that followed her through it, like light that hadn't fully committed to its own visibility. She thought about the old she-wolf who'd recovered her sight and claimed she'd seen a face in her sleep, a face with a mark like burning silver. She picked up the pile of folded cloth and delivered it to where it needed to go. The night before the ceremony, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the servants' quarters and listened to the breathing of the room and felt the marks on her forearms. More extensive now, she knew without rolling up her sleeves, had felt them spreading in the slow, heatless way of something that had always been there, and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Lyra had said. Someone outside the pack. A timeline. Something Seraphine was waiting for. She turned this over, the way she turned over all problems, without panic, without the jagged edges of hope, with the cold, flat instrument of practical consideration. The ceremony was tomorrow. Kyle would announce his choice of Luna before the full pack and the assembled delegates. The smart money, everyone's money, stated loudly and often, was on Seraphine. The alliance she represented was politically advantageous. She was beautiful and ambitious and had been working this particular angle for 18 months. Celine had no stake in the announcement. She had no stake in anything that happened at High Table. She was the floor that got walked on, not the people doing the walking. She told herself this cleanly and without self-pity. And yet she had survived 3 years in this house by reading currents that other people missed. And every current she could feel told her tomorrow was not going to go the way anyone planned. The marks on her arms pulsed once, just once, like a slow heartbeat, with a light she felt rather than saw. She clenched her jaw. She breathed. Outside, from somewhere deep in the Hollow's forest, something howled, not a Black Hollow wolf. She knew all of Black Hollow's wolves by sound, by scent, by the particular timbre of their voices. This was different, older, lower, a sound that moved through her ribcage like something being unlocked. The sleepers in the room didn't stir. She was the only one who heard it. She sat up slowly in the dark and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth and felt the mark beneath her sleeve like a coal that had finally found oxygen. Somewhere in the forbidden forest, something very old and very patient was ending its wait. And the girl they called Cursed, the Omega who scrubbed floors before the pack woke up, the woman who had been doing her survival math in cold blood for 3 years without flinching, she felt for the first time the terrible and specific weight of being recognized by something that knew exactly what she was. She didn't sleep. When the first light came, she rose. She washed her face in the cold basin. She wrapped her hands. She went to start the day. But this morning, walking across the courtyard to the kitchen entrance in the gray pre-dawn, she was aware of something she had successfully suppressed for 3 years. A thing she had folded away and filed under dangerous, and then filed further under unaffordable, and then buried under the daily mathematics of endurance. She was aware that she was waiting, had always been waiting, and that whatever she had been waiting for was, as of last night, done waiting in return. The ceremony was 12 hours away. By the time it ended, nothing about Black Hollow would ever be the same. She was almost to the kitchen door when she heard voices, urgent, hushed, wrong, in the way that voices are wrong when people are trying to keep something from spreading. She stopped at the corner of the east wall and didn't announce herself, which was a habit so ingrained it required no thought. 2 senior warriors, Castor and another man she knew as Vice, the head of Kyle's guard. Their backs to her, facing the direction of the forest. 3 sightings, Castor was saying, all in the last 6 hours. The boundary wolves are refusing to go back out. Refusing, Vice said. The word held its own kind of violence. Refusing, Castor confirmed. Won't explain it. Just say they won't go back to that section of the northern edge. You know Garen doesn't refuse anything. A silence. What kind of tracks? Vice said. That's the thing. Castor's voice had gone strange, a quality in it she'd never heard before. Not fear exactly, but something that fear was made from. The tracks aren't right, too large. The stride pattern is wrong. And the snow where they walked is like the snow hasn't decided what to do yet, like it's waiting. You're not making sense. I know, Castor said. I know I'm not. They moved away. Their voices disappeared. Celine stood at the corner of the east wall with the cold pressing against her face and thought about ancient wolves believed extinct for centuries and old legends that packs told their children to make them obedient, and a mark on her neck she'd been born with that. The midwife who delivered her had described, according to her mother, before her mother stopped talking about such things, as a crest of burning silver. She pressed 2 fingers against her neck, right side, below the ear. The mark was warm. It had always been warm. She had always told herself it was body heat. She had always been, she understood now with the particular clarity that comes from a long sleep ending, very good at telling herself necessary things. Inside the kitchen behind her, the cook fires began to catch. 12 hours until the ceremony. The ancient wolves were at the northern edge of the forest, and somewhere in the main house, Seraphine of the outside meetings and the dangerous timelines was awake and moving and arranging something that Lyra had not been able to name, but that had put real fear in the eyes of a woman who wasn't frightened of much. The morning moved toward the inevitable the way mornings do, indifferent to the thing they're carrying, just delivering the hours as they come. Celine went into the kitchen. She started the work. She kept her sleeves down. She did not tell herself to be patient anymore. The ceremony began at the 7th hour of evening. By the 8th hour, 3 things would happen simultaneously. The ancient wolves would appear, Seraphine's plans would detonate, and Cale Draven would watch the entire architecture of everything he thought he understood collapse. And see, standing in the wreckage, the woman he had spent 3 years making invisible. What nobody in Black Hollow was prepared for was this. She had been watching back. The whole time, she had been watching back. And she had not once, forgotten a single thing. The ceremony was supposed to start at the 7th hour. By the 6th hour and 40 minutes, Celine already knew it was going to be wrong. She felt it the way you feel weather coming before the sky admits to anything. A pressure change, something in the air losing its normal texture. She was in the servants' preparation corridor off the main hall, carrying fresh torches to the bracket holders along the east wall, doing the work that needed doing while the pack assembled in their finery and took their positions and arranged themselves into the hierarchy that Black Hollow performed on formal occasions like a man putting on a better coat. The great hall had been transformed. She had done some of the transforming, had spent 2 hours the previous afternoon polishing the long oak tables, had carried the formal candelabras from storage and set them at the intervals she was told to set them, had positioned the elder seats with the precise, unmarked precision that ceremony required. The hall looked like power made physical. Stone and firelight, and the accumulated weight of every formal gathering Black Hollow had held in its history, all landing simultaneously on this one room. She set the last torch in its bracket and stepped back into the servant passage before the hall filled entirely. Through the stone gap that served as the passage's viewing slit, a feature of old construction meant for nothing more romantic than servant movement monitoring, she watched the pack assemble. Riverpack's 4 delegates were already positioned on the left flank. David Ashcroft stood at the end of the delegation row, a head taller than the man beside him, watching the room the way a man watches a room when he knows something in it is going to matter. His eyes moved across the space methodically, cataloging. They passed over the servant passage gap without stopping. The elder wolves took the high seats. 5 of them, all old, all with the weathered, load-bearing quality of people who have survived long enough to become structural. She didn't know their names. Nobody had ever told her. Black Hollow's ranked wolves filled the remaining space in order. Warriors, then mid-rank, then lower rank, with the precise social choreography that the pack performed so automatically it had long since stopped looking like effort. It was just how they stood. Then Seraphine entered. She came in through the main doors in the formal Luna entrance, the wide approach that allowed the room to see you before you arrived at your position, the visual grammar of someone who expected to be looked at. She wore deep charcoal and silver, which she had clearly chosen deliberately. Luna colors, or close enough to make the implication. Her hair was up. She was beautiful in the aggressive, declarative way she was always beautiful, but tonight there was something else in it. Something tightly wound, a preparedness that registered in her shoulders, in the set of her jaw. She was not nervous. She was ready. The distinction hit Celine like cold water. Nervous and ready were different animals. Ready meant a plan. Ready meant confidence in a timeline. Ready meant that whatever Lyra had half-named in that back passage was not a possibility but a commitment, and it was running on schedule. Celine pressed her fingers against the stone wall of the passage and breathed slowly and thought about the marks on her forearms that had spread further overnight, reaching her inner elbows now, and about the howl from the northern forest that nobody else had heard, and about Garen and his refusing to go back to the northern edge. Then Kael came in. He entered from the Alpha's private approach, the side passage that connected his wing directly to the dais, bypassing the main floor. He came in alone, without Castor, which was unusual. He wore the formal Black Hollow black, heavy, close cut, with the pack crest at his left chest. And he looked like what he was, the way he always looked like what he was. No performance required. The room tilted toward him on instinct, the way all rooms did. His face was closed. Not the usual closed. Something tighter behind it tonight, something he was working to contain. He took his position on the dais. His eyes moved once across the room and stopped for a fraction of a second on a point she couldn't identify from her angle. Then he looked forward. The ceremony began. Celine should have left the passage. Her work was done. Her presence here was technically beyond assignment, and if someone noticed a servant lingering at the viewing gap during a formal ceremony, it would be noted, and it would cost her. She knew all of this with the precise clarity of 3 years' accumulated risk assessment. She stayed. The opening was formal and patterned and long. The elder protocols, the recitation of pack history, the territorial acknowledgments. She had heard pieces of this structure before, from outside rooms through walls. Up close, it had a different weight. These were not words. They were load-bearing. They were the architecture that the pack's entire social reality sat on top of, and the elders spoke them with the gravity of people who understood that architecture required maintenance. She watched Seraphine through the viewing gap. The Luna stood on Kael's right, slightly behind and to the side, the formal position of the pack's highest-ranked female who was not yet officially Luna. She held herself with absolute stillness, which Celine read correctly as the stillness of someone managing a great deal of internal activity. Her hands, clasped in front of her, were pressing against each other with a force that wasn't visible from across the room, but that Celine could deduce from the slight whitening at the knuckles. A countdown, Celine thought. She is running a countdown. The elder wolf on the far left, oldest of the 5, a woman with white hair and a face that had been carved by about 8 decades of decision-making, raised her hand. The recitation stopped. "We approach the declaration," the old woman said. Her voice carried without effort, the effortless projection of someone who had been listened to for 50 years and expected no less. Alpha Kale Draven of Black Hollow will name his chosen mate before the assembled pack and our honored guests. The selection is binding under pack law. Does the Alpha affirm his readiness? He does, Kael said. One word, flat, carrying nothing. Celine watched his hands. He stood with them at his sides, which was his neutral position, the way a man stands when he is deciding not to express anything with his body. His right hand closed once, briefly, then opened. Something was wrong with him. Not wrong like a man having second thoughts about a public announcement. She'd seen that, knew what it looked like. Wrong like a man who had just received information that had not finished landing yet. Like the decision in his body and the decision in his head were running on a slight delay from each other. Then the pack stands ready to receive the Alpha's declaration, the elder said. Kael stepped forward. One step, which was the formal indicator that the declaration was beginning. The room adjusted imperceptibly. The quality of silence changed. 36 wolves holding their breath. He opened his mouth, and the castle shook, not violently, not an earthquake, not an attack, a vibration, deep and tectonic, like something vast had moved nearby, something large enough that the stones of the hall felt its displacement. Dust sifted from the rafters, a candelabra swayed. 2 warriors reached reflexively for weapons that weren't there, because you didn't come armed to a formal ceremony. Then the howls started, multiple voices. From outside the walls, from the direction of the northern forest, coming in overlapping waves that didn't sound like any wolf Celine had ever heard. Lower than they should be, older. The sound had a resonance that did something strange to the air, the way certain frequencies make glass want to come apart. Every wolf in the room stiffened. Instinct, Celine thought, pure instinct, bypassing the cognition. Whatever those voices were, some part of every wolf in this hall knew them at a level that couldn't be accessed by the thinking part of the brain. Then the main doors opened. They opened from outside, both of them, simultaneously, pushed by something that wasn't human. The first wolf came through the doors, and the room went completely, absolutely still. It was silver white and enormous. The dimensions were wrong in a way that was hard to process, the way your mind resists objects that don't fit the category they belong to. It stood as high as a full-grown man at the shoulder. Its eyes were the color of water over old ice. It moved without sound, which was the most wrong thing, because something that size should make the floor feel its weight, But it crossed the threshold and the great hall received it as if it had always been expected. 3 more came behind it. They spread into the hall in a loose formation. Every ranked wolf in the room had dropped to one knee. Not a decision, a physical response, automatic, the body doing something the mind hadn't voted on. Warriors who had never knelt for anything. Senior wolves who carried 30 years of status in their posture. On their knees in under 2 seconds, looking at the floor. The elder wolves at the high seats were the only ones still upright. The old woman with the white hair was standing, and her face had gone the specific blank of someone seeing a thing they had spent their entire career being uncertain was real. Kale had not moved. He was the only one in the room besides the elders who was still on his feet. His hands were at his sides. His face was doing nothing. His eyes were tracking the silver wolves with the practiced assessment of a man running threat analysis on something he had never trained for. The lead wolf stopped. It stood in the center of the hall. It looked at Kyle for one moment, and in that moment the air in the hall did something that Celine felt in her sternum like a change in barometric pressure. Then it looked away from him. It turned. It looked directly at the servant passage. Celine's body went very cold and very still. The silver wolf walked toward the passage. The crowd parted without being asked, warriors shifting on their knees to create space, because the alternative was to be walked through and nobody in that room was going to test that alternative. It stopped in front of the viewing gap. Through the narrow stone slit, Celine looked into its eyes. And the thing that happened next didn't happen in the room. It happened somewhere interior, somewhere that didn't have geography. A recognition that moved from the wolf's eyes into her chest, like a key going into a lock that had been waiting so long the mechanism had almost forgotten it was a mechanism. "Come out," the old woman said. Not to the wolf, to Celine. The silence in the hall had a new texture now, sharp, fragile, like ice that has been stressed past its tolerance and is deciding. Celine looked down at her hands, the wrapped cloth around her palms, the sleeves pulled down over the marks that reached her elbows now, the rough tunic she'd put on this morning in the dark, same as every morning, from the pile of servants' clothes that had no individual ownership. She thought, you can stay in the passage. You cannot come out. You can make a different calculation, the survival calculation, the one you've been making for 3 years. Then she thought, the window for that calculation closed last night when something in the forest decided it was done waiting. She pushed the passage door open and walked into the hall. The second she crossed the threshold, the 4 silver wolves turned toward her in unison. The movement had no hesitation in it, no consideration. The way compass needles turned to north, because turning was not a decision, it was a property. She walked across the floor of the hall. Her footsteps were very loud in the silence. She was wearing work boots and a servant's tunic, and she had a split on her right palm that had soaked through the wrapping, and she walked through 36 kneeling wolves and 4 ancient creatures and the accumulated formal weight of Black Hollow's most significant ceremony, and she felt every inch of it, and she kept walking. She stopped in the center of the hall where the lead wolf was. It was taller than her. It lowered its enormous head and bowed. The sound that moved through the room after that was not a sound people made with intention. It was involuntary, a collective exhale, a dozen people breathing out at once, the sound of a room losing its structural certainty. Seraphine's voice cut through it like something thrown. "This is a performance," she said. Sharp and immediate, no hesitation, the voice of a person who had anticipated needing to move fast. Someone staged this. An Omega servant doesn't... Be quiet, the old elder woman, not raising her voice. Seraphine's mouth closed. Her eyes didn't. Kale hadn't moved. He was looking at Celine with an expression she had never seen on his face. The specific blankness of a man whose primary framework for understanding the world has just been removed from under him. The elder woman moved down from the high seat, slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone who had been waiting to move for a very long time. She crossed the floor to Celine. She stood close. She looked at Celine's face, then down at her covered forearms, then up. "Show me," the old woman said. Celine held her gaze for a moment. Then she pulled her sleeves back. The marks had spread further since morning. They ran from her wrists past her elbows and up the inside of her arms. The ash-silver lines that weren't quite lines, that had the quality of things that had been there always and were only now deciding to be seen. In the candlelight of the formal hall, They were visible as they hadn't been in the gray morning light. A faint luminescence that wasn't light exactly, but was what light would look like if it were a property of skin rather than a property of fire. The elder's breath went out of her slowly. "Pull her collar," one of the other elders said. An old man, voice gone rough. The elder woman reached out and moved the neck of Celine's tunic aside, not harshly, with a precise, purposeful movement, and looked at the mark below her right ear. "Mother of wolves," the old man said. Not an exclamation. A statement, the way you state a mathematical fact after the proof is complete. "That's not possible," said one of the other elders. "That line was erased. 3 generations back, that line was—" "Erased isn't the same as ended," the old woman said. She was still looking at Celine's face. Something in her own face had shifted. The careful neutrality of a woman who had been managing a secret for a very long time was coming apart, and what was underneath it was not relief exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a heavy thing finally being set down. "What does that mean?" Castor said from somewhere behind the kneeling warriors. He was standing. He was one of the only ones. "What does the mother line mean?" The old woman didn't answer him. She looked at Celine. "Did you know?" she asked. "I suspected," Celine said. "I didn't have words for it." "The mark started when?" 3 nights ago. They've been spreading." The elder nodded slowly. The ceremony would have triggered the acceleration, even proximity to the formal pack protocols. The declaration, the assembly. She paused. "You were in the forest as a child." It wasn't a question. "My mother's settlement was on the northern border," Celine said. "I spent a lot of time in the northern edge." "Did you ever go past the marked trees into the deep section?" Celine looked at her. "I don't remember." The old woman looked at her with the expression of someone who knows exactly what "I don't remember" means, when a person says it in that specific tone of voice. "That's enough for now," the elder said. She turned to the room. "The pack will witness," she said, and her voice did something different now. It carried the resonance of formal declaration, the load-bearing kind. "The crest of the first line is confirmed. The blood carries." "This is insane," Seraphine said. She had moved. Celine registered this, had been tracking Seraphine in her peripheral vision from the moment she'd walked in, because Lyra had said ready, and Celine believed Lyra, had watched her move from her formal position near the dais to a new position that was slightly to the left and further back. A position that, Celine now recognized with the cold clarity of pattern recognition, was closer to the main doors. "A servant crawls out of the walls and shows some skin markings, and that supersedes a formal declaration ceremony?" Seraphine said. She was managing her voice carefully, the calculation visible in it, the speed at which she was building a counter-narrative. "Whatever this is, it's a disruption. It should be investigated after the Alpha's declaration proceeds, not instead of it." "The declaration cannot proceed," the elder woman said. "Not until—" "Why not?" Seraphine's eyes went to Kael. They were very bright and very focused. "Kael," his name in her mouth like a held card. "You were about to make a declaration. The pack is assembled. The guests are watching. Whatever this is, it waits. Make the declaration." The room's attention swung to the Alpha. Kael was looking at Celine, not at the silver wolves, not at the elders. At Celine, with that expression she couldn't name, the one that looked like a man discovering a room in a house he thought he'd known for years. "Kael," Seraphine said again, sharper. His eyes moved to her slowly. The movement had a quality Celine had never seen in him. Not deliberation exactly, but something deliberation was made from. He was making a calculation. She could see it happening. 3 years of watching this man move through rooms told her he was doing the specific calculus of a person who is re-evaluating a structure they had assumed was load-bearing and discovering it was not. "Where were you last night?" he said. Seraphine's stillness changed quality. "What?" "Last night, after the delegation dinner. You left before the meal finished. Where did you go?" "I don't see how that—" "It's a simple question." The hall had gone so quiet that the candle flames were audible, small hissing sounds as the wax moved. "I went to my chambers," Seraphine said. "I had a headache." "Your chambers are in the east wing," Castor said from behind the warriors. His voice had picked up something new in it, a direction, a sharpening. "The east wing guard logged you going out through the side gate at the 10th hour." Seraphine's jaw set. "Who did you meet?" Kael said. This is not the time, or the, who did you meet? The words came out level, not louder. Kale's voice didn't escalate. It compressed. It got quieter and more specific. The way pressure works. The way a thing that is squeezed into a smaller space becomes denser than it was. Seraphine looked at him across the hall, and Celine watched the calculation run to its end behind her eyes and watched Seraphine make a decision. You don't deserve the truth, Seraphine said. Her voice had dropped the management. What was underneath it was colder and more real. You deserved someone who knew how to use the position you were too sentimental to maximize. But you were always... The main doors opened again. Not silver wolves this time. 6 men came through the doors. None of them were pack wolves. They wore the road clothes of men who had traveled fast and light and were carrying purpose in how they moved, spreading as they entered, taking positions, the choreography of people who had done this before in other rooms. Hunters. Not the casual territorial sense of the word, the specific professional kind that the packs had been quietly worried about for a decade, organized, funded, knowing. 3 of them carried tools that Celine recognized from descriptions she had heard and wished she hadn't. Now, Seraphine said, and the hall broke open. The first thing that happened was the silver wolves. They moved before the hunters had fully cleared the doorway. That same soundless, massive motion flowing into the space between the hunters and the rest of the room with a speed that seemed wrong for their size. One hunter discharged something at close range that was meant for the lead wolf, and the lead wolf was not there when it arrived. The second thing was Kael. He came off the dais in a motion that cleared the distance between him and the nearest hunter in 2 seconds, and Celine marked the expression on his face as he moved. Not rage, not panic. The specific empty focus of a man for whom the gap between a threat and a response to it was functionally zero. The third thing was Seraphine, who was moving toward the side passage. The same passage Celine had just come out of. Celine moved. She cut across the hall on a diagonal, not running exactly, moving with the low, fast economy of someone who knew this floor better than anyone else in the room because she had cleaned every foot of it 100 times, and she reached the passage door before Seraphine did. Seraphine stopped, 3 feet between them. Up close, past the management and the calculation, Seraphine's face showed the thing that was underneath all of it. Not fear. Contempt, old and specific and load-bearing. Move, Seraphine said. No, Celine said. You have no rank. You have no right to stand in my... I'm standing here, Celine said. You can have a philosophical argument with me about the ranking system while the room is on fire, or you can tell me who's outside that gate. Seraphine looked at her. Something shifted in her face. A fractional recalibration. The kind that happens when someone realizes the thing in front of them is different from what they'd been accounting for. There's no one outside the gate, Seraphine said. Very level, the tell being precisely how level it was. Behind them, the hall was in controlled violence. Wolves and hunters in motion, the silver wolves cutting through it with that terrible, noiseless efficiency. Kael had 1 hunter down already. Castor had moved the elder wolves back toward the high seats, forming a barrier with 3 senior warriors. David Ashcroft, Celine noted in some back compartment of her awareness, had positioned himself directly in front of the Riverpack delegates and was holding the line with his body while his people moved behind him. Something to file away. She looked back at Seraphine. The North Gate, Celine said. The one the East Wing Guard didn't cover. How many? Seraphine's eyes were doing something fast and internal. Celine watched her run the math and watched her arrive at the answer that there was no exit left in this room that didn't go through Celine or through a silver wolf or through an alpha who had just revised his threat assessment of everyone in his vicinity. 4, Seraphine said. It came out flat, the tone of a person releasing something they no longer needed to protect. They're carrying the compound, the same compound. The poisoned warriors, Celine said. Seraphine's chin lifted. It was never going to be enough to just take the pack. You have to take the bloodline. As long as the old blood has a body to live in, someone will always come looking for it. The marks on Celine's arms were doing something. She was aware of it without looking. The heatless pulse. Stronger now. Something that had been banked and careful and patient for a very long time, running out of reasons to stay quiet. How long have you known what I was? Celine said. Seraphine's expression shifted into something that was for the first time entirely unmanaged. Raw. "Longer than you have," she said. "My family's pack had the records, the ones that were supposed to be destroyed. We kept them." A pause. Something like defiance, or something that had been defiance for so long it had become part of the face. "You were never supposed to exist." "And yet," Celine said. She stepped aside from the passage door, not to let Seraphine through, to move past her. She went toward the north corridor, the one that connected to the side gate, the one that 4 hunters with a poison compound were moving through right now. And she moved through the hall without looking at the fight around her, and felt the marks on her arms go from warmth to something that had no clean name, something that started in her skin and moved inward. And she thought about her mother's settlement on the northern border, and the deep section of the forest she did not remember, and the things she'd felt last night in the dark of the servants' quarters when the howl came through the walls, the recognition, the specific weight of being known. She hit the north corridor at a run. Behind her in the great hall, she heard Kael call her name, not the way he'd said it in the secondary chamber, quiet, testing. A shout. The full weight of it, the alpha command in it, the sound a man makes when something matters, and he has run out of the capacity to pretend otherwise. She did not stop. She hit the north gate at full speed, pushed through into the cold outer yard, and stopped. 4 hunters. Seraphine had been accurate about the number. They were already in the yard, and they had heard her coming, and they were not surprised. And the man at the front was holding a glass container that caught the moonlight with the specific color of something that had been engineered rather than found. The marks on her arms were burning. Cold fire. The kind that doesn't consume. The kind that has been waiting in the walls of a thing for so long that when it comes through, it doesn't arrive angry. It arrives inevitable. She looked at the 4 hunters, and they looked at her, and in the silence of the outer yard she could feel, from somewhere past the tree line to the north, something vast and patient beginning to move. She had spent 3 years learning that waiting was not weakness. She was done waiting. The hunter with the compound took 1 step forward, and the tree line exploded with light. The light from the tree line wasn't fire. It was older than fire. It moved the way fire doesn't, without consuming, without spreading, without the chaotic appetite that makes flame recognizable. It came through the trees in discrete points, like eyes opening, like something that had been sleeping for a very long time, deciding simultaneously to wake up. Silver white. Multiple sources. Moving with the specific, weighted deliberateness of things that were very large and not in any hurry, because hurry implied uncertainty about the outcome. The hunter with the compound took 1 look at the tree line and stopped moving. All 4 of them stopped. The yard went very still. Celine stood between them and the light, and felt the marks on her arms running hot in a way that had passed through pain and out the other side into something that wasn't pain anymore, something more structural, like the feeling of a bone setting, like the body correcting a thing that had been wrong for a long time. She breathed. The cold air came in and went out, and she stood in the middle of the outer yard between 4 armed hunters and the tree line full of ancient light, and thought about nothing except the next 10 seconds. The lead hunter, older than the others, a scar running jaw to collarbone, the eyes of a man who had made his peace with dangerous decisions, looked at her, not at the tree line, at her. "You're what they sent us for," he said. "I know," she said. "Then you know this doesn't stop. We're not the last." "I know that too." He looked at her for a moment with something that was almost professional respect, the way one person who understands a hard business acknowledges another. Then his eyes went to the tree line, and whatever he saw there made the professional respect give way to something more fundamental. He lowered the compound. Not surrender. She read that clearly. Assessment. A man recalculating the math on whether this particular job, on this particular night, against whatever was coming out of that forest, was worth the original fee. The first silver wolf cleared the tree line. Then the second, third, fourth. They came through into the yard in a loose spread, soundless as always, massive as always, and they arranged themselves in a formation that put Selene at the center of a shape that was both protective and something else. Declarative, the way a flag planted in ground is declarative. The hunter with the scar took 2 steps backward. "We're leaving," he said to his 3 men. None of them argued. They left through the north gate fast and without running, the specific controlled retreat of professionals who know when a situation has exceeded its parameters. The gate swung behind them. The sound of their footsteps faded. Celine stood in the cold and breathed. Then she heard Kyle behind her. He came through the corridor door at speed and pulled up short when he found the yard empty of hunters and full of silver wolves arranged around a single servant. He took in the tableau in the way he took in everything, fast, complete, with the alpha's instinct for rapid threat assessment. And the assessment clearly returned results he didn't have a prior framework for. "They're gone," Celine said. "How?" She looked at the tree line. "I think they weighed their options." He was quiet for 3 seconds. She could hear him breathing from 8 feet away. Controlled, deliberate, the breathing of a man managing adrenaline through technique. He'd been in a fight. There was blood on his jaw from the cut that had been there since morning, plus something new at his temple. His formal black was torn at the left shoulder. "Seraphine," he said. "Still in the hall," Celine said, "unless she found another exit." He turned. She followed him back through the corridor door. The great hall had gone from active violence to its aftermath, which had its own particular texture, the specific, depleted quiet of a space where serious things just happened. 2 hunters were down, restrained by warriors using rope from the storage alcove off the kitchen passage. 1 warrior was being supported by 2 others, favoring his left leg badly. The elder wolves were still at the high seats, the old woman standing, watching the room with an expression that was doing a great deal of work. The silver wolves had come back inside. She hadn't heard them follow. Davin Ashcroft was still on his feet, his delegation grouped tight behind him. He looked at Celine when she entered with the specific attention of a man filing information for later use. Seraphine was in the center of the hall. Castor was standing behind her with 2 senior warriors flanking, which meant she had been caught attempting an exit and returned. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and the particular composure of a person who has gone past the point of managing the room and is now only managing themselves. Kyle walked to the center of the hall and stopped in front of her. The room watched. "Tell me all of it," he said. "You won't like it," she said. "Tell me anyway." Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face moved. Not softening, not regret. More like the release of tension in a structure that had been holding a shape for a very long time and was now free to stop. "Your bloodline survey from 3 years ago," she said. "The one your father commissioned before he died. The search for pack descendants across the border territories. You thought it was about military alliances." Kyle was very still. "My family's pack had a copy of what it actually found," Seraphine said. "It found her. Her mother's settlement, the outer border. Your father knew what the mother line was. He had the old records. Not all of them, but enough. He commissioned the survey to find the last carrier." She paused. "And then he died." The silence in the hall changed quality. "He died before he could act on it," Seraphine continued. "So the information passed to the people around him. And some of those people understood what they had and decided that the cleanest solution was to bring her inside the territory, under control, where she could be managed until a permanent arrangement could be made." Celine heard this the way you hear something you already knew but had not let yourself fully assemble. It landed in her chest with the specific weight of a thing that has been true for a long time and is only now being acknowledged. She had not come to Black Hollow through necessity, through the collapse of something else, through the absence of better options. She had been moved here. Cale turned and looked at her. Something in his face was very bad. Not the flat, closed look she knew, not the careful management of the secondary chamber, not any expression she had cataloged in 3 years. This was new. This was the look of a man standing on ground that has just revealed itself as a different thing than he thought it was. "Did you know?" he said. Not an accusation, a question. Genuine and stripped of everything diplomatic. "No," she said. "I knew something was wrong with how I got here. I didn't know what." "Your mother," he started. "My mother died 3 months after we moved to the settlement," Celine said. "She said it was illness. I was 17. She held his gaze. "I don't think it was illness." The hall absorbed this. Cale turned back to Seraphine. "Who gave the order? For the mother." "I don't know all the names," Seraphine said. "I know who paid my family to be here, to monitor, to make sure the girl stayed small and stayed controllable and stayed exactly where they put her until someone could make the decision about what to do permanently." "Who paid you?" Kyle said. Castor, Seraphine said. The word hit the room like a stone hitting water. Everything rippled. Celine watched Kael, watched the moment happen in him. The specific internal event of a man hearing the name of someone he had trusted for 15 years placed next to the word paid. She watched him not move. The absolute physical control of a man holding himself very still, because if he stops holding, something irreversible happens. Castor's voice came from behind her. That's not accurate. Not a denial exactly. Not I didn't do it. That's not accurate, which was a different statement, which was the statement of a man making a fine legal distinction. Kael turned to face his beta. Castor was a man who had carried authority so long it had become posture. 60 years old, built like a siege weapon, a face that had been in enough decisions to know exactly what they cost. He stood among the two warriors who had been flanking Seraphine, and he looked at his alpha, and he did not look like a man who was afraid. That, Celine thought, was the most dangerous thing in the room. Not accurate, Kael said. The order didn't originate with me, Castor said. The order was already running when your father died. I inherited a situation. You managed a situation, Kael said. Yes. Direct, unapologetic. Because someone had to. Because your father found something that had no clean answer and died before he could work out what to do with it. And I had two choices. Burn the information or manage it. I managed it. You managed it, Kael said, by putting her here, in the lowest rank, where she'd be controlled, where she couldn't access anything that would trigger the bloodline. Yes. And her mother, Castor's jaw tightened. I didn't order that. I want to be clear on that. What happened to the settlement? He stopped. Something moved through his face that wasn't guilt exactly, but was in the same country. I didn't order it, but I knew afterward, and I didn't undo it. The silence in the hall was extraordinary, the compressed, load-bearing kind. Kael stood very still for 5 seconds. She counted them. She watched him move through something in that 5 seconds, watched the 15 years of trust, the partnership that had held through 6 years of alpha challenges, through every hard decision, through the weight of the title that he'd taken at 22 and carried every day since. She watched him work out what to do with the knowledge that it had been built on this. Take him, Kael said to the two warriors flanking Castor. Castor didn't resist. That was almost worse. The dignity of a man who had already made his peace with this particular outcome. He let the warriors take his arms, and he looked at Kael and said quietly, Everything I did was for this pack. I know, Kael said. His voice had gone to a register Celine had never heard from him. Very quiet, very specific, the sound of something breaking that is too dense to make noise. That's the worst part of it, I know. They took Castor out of the hall. The room breathed, and then the old elder woman moved and everything shifted again. She walked to Celine in that unhurried, structural way she had, the walk of someone who had been waiting for this particular moment and was not going to rush it. She stopped close and looked up at her with the white-haired, carved face. You need to understand what the marks mean, the old woman said. Not the story the packs tell children, what it actually means. I need to know why 4 armed hunters were sent here tonight, Celine said. And who sent them? Those are the same question, the elder said. The hall had gone quiet around them, people listening but pretending not to, the specific attentiveness of wolves who understood that what was said in the next few minutes was going to be the weight that the rest of their lives sat on. The old woman looked at Celine with eyes that had the quality of very old water, deep color, carrying things that had settled over a long time. The motherline doesn't just carry old blood, she said. It carries the pack authority structure itself. Every alpha title in every pack in these territories descends from a single origin point. And that origin point was the first wolves, and the first wolves answered to one bloodline. Not a ruler, not a conqueror. The word in the old tongue is closer to root, the thing that everything else grows from. Celine was very still. If the motherline produces a living heir, and that heir comes into the marks, which requires specific triggers, proximity to large formal pack gatherings, and what we call the recognition event, which happened to you 3 nights ago in the forest when you were a child and again last night. I wasn't in the forest last night, Celine said. The elder looked at her. You walked in your sleep for 3 years before you came here. Your mother's settlement people. The two who survived and made it to river territory, they documented it. We have their account." She paused. "You were in the deep forest section every full moon for 4 years when you were a child. The ancient wolves knew you then. They've been following your movement across the territory since before you knew what following meant." Celine thought about the dreams, the forest that wasn't quite the Hollow's forest, the things between the trees that followed her without menace. Not dreams, memory. "What does a living heir in the marks mean?" she said. "Specifically, for the pack structure." "It means every alpha title becomes provisional," the elder said. "Not ended. Provisional. Subject to the first line's confirmation. In practice, it means every alpha in every pack either gets her approval or loses the foundation their authority is built on," Kael said. He had moved closer. He was standing on Celine's left, not quite beside her. A position that was careful, that wasn't claiming proximity, but wasn't maintaining distance either. His voice was flat with the flatness of a man processing very large information in real time. "Yes," the elder said. "And the hunters," Kael said, "they weren't from one pack." "No, the funding came from 7 different alpha territories. A consortium, if you want to be generous. They've been aware of the bloodline resurgence possibility for 2 years. They commissioned Seraphine's placement here. The plan was containment." The elder paused. "When containment became untenable, the plan became elimination. 7 packs," Kael said. He said it with the specific quiet intensity of a man doing threat math. 7 alpha territories funded an assassination run on an Omega servant in my house. He said it again, differently. "In my house." "You were never supposed to find out," Seraphine said from somewhere behind them. Her voice was tired now, not broken. Tired. "You were supposed to announce me as Luna. The marks would have been explained away on... I had a cover narrative ready, a medical explanation, and then within the year, quietly..." "Stop," Kael said. She stopped. He looked at Celine. She looked back. The great hall of Black Hollow full of kneeling ranks and 4 enormous silver wolves, and the firelight going everywhere, and a mating ceremony that had been supposed to go very differently about 45 minutes ago. All of it was there. All of it was witness. And Kael said, "I owe you a debt I don't have a name for." She held his gaze. "You owe me nothing. What was done to me wasn't your doing." "No," he said. "But I let 3 years happen. I knew things were wrong. I stood inside what I knew was wrong and called it order. That has a cost." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm telling you I know what it is." The elder cleared her throat. Not rudely, purposefully. "There's still the matter of the 7 packs," she said, "and the compound the hunters carried. We have 2 of them in custody. We need to know if more is already inside the walls." The warrior with the bad leg said something from across the room. 1 word. Celine didn't hear it clearly, but Kael did. His entire posture changed. The specific change that happens when a man who has been managing multiple crises is handed one more thing, and the one more thing turns out to be the thing that breaks the tolerance of the stack. "Say it again," he said. The warrior said it again, louder. "The water supply. The eastern cistern. Garen found the delivery mechanism an hour ago. It's already in the system." The room moved. Everything moved. Warriors toward the exits, elders toward each other, the silver wolves raising their enormous heads in unison, as if they'd heard something at a frequency the room's human occupants couldn't access. Celine understood before anyone finished explaining. The compound wasn't for the hunters to deploy. The hunters were the distraction. The ceremony, the chaos, Seraphine's exposed betrayal. All of it was designed to occupy the pack's attention while the compound went into the water. By morning, every wolf in Black Hollow who had drunk from the eastern cistern would be down. How many of the pack drank from that cistern, she did not know. Kael's face told her the number was high. She looked at the marks on her arms. Fully visible now in the firelight, spread to her shoulders she could feel that, the faintest edges of them, at her collarbone. The old woman had said healing. She hadn't asked what kind of healing. She hadn't asked what it cost. She thought about the old she-wolf who had recovered her sight, the wolf pup with the killing fever, the leg that had set clean overnight. She thought about the forest and the things that followed her through it, and the recognition that had hit her like a key turning. She thought about her mother. She turned to the elder woman. Can I stop it? The compound, if it's already in the water, can the bloodline do something about it? The elder's face went careful, very carefully neutral in the way that means there is an answer, and the answer has a weight to it. Yes, the old woman said. What does it require? A pause. The hall listening. Full activation, the elder said. Not the partial emergence you're carrying now. Complete, irreversible. She looked at Celine's arms, then at her face. You go in completely. You don't come back out the way you went in. You won't be an Omega servant anymore. You won't be a woman with some marks on her arms. You'll be what the blood says you are. Fully, permanently. Celine looked at her. And if I don't, by morning, the elder said, your water carries a compound that will put most of this pack in the ground. Not all of them. The strong ones, the alphas, they'll survive weakened. But the mid-ranks, the lower ranks, the families in the outer quarters. She stopped because she didn't need to finish. Celine knew who lived in the outer quarters. She knew their names. She had cleaned their corridors and carried their water and been invisible among them for 3 years. She knew which children belonged to which mothers. She knew which of the kitchen girls had a wolf pup that still couldn't shift, 4 years old, who she had watched through the fence of the outer yard with the specific, careful attention she'd learned to give to things she wasn't allowed to protect openly. She stood in the center of the great hall with the ancient wolves arranged around her and the firelight doing everything fire does, and the full weight of a choice landing on her that had exactly 2 options, and no third one. Stay partial. Stay the woman who had survived 3 years by being small and patient and very careful with her arithmetic. Watch the compound do what it was designed to do. Keep the last of the self that had learned to exist in the narrow space between one blow and the next. Or go in completely. Become the thing the blood demanded. Take on the full weight of what it meant to be the root that everything else grew from. The responsibility, the permanence, the irreversibility of becoming something that couldn't be taken back. The choice was not actually a choice. She had always known, somewhere below the survival math and the careful walls, that there are moments when who you have been is not enough for what is required, that endurance is not the same as living, that patience is not the same as purpose. She had been doing the arithmetic of staying alive for 3 years. She was very good at it, but arithmetic is not the same as deciding what you're alive for. She looked at Kael. Something in his face, he understood what was being asked of her. She could see it. He stood there with the blood on his jaw and the torn shoulder and the 15-year betrayal still raw in him, and he looked at her and he didn't ask her to do it. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with the eyes of a man who was standing inside the consequences of every choice he'd made incorrectly and was not going to add one more to the pile by asking her to carry something else on his behalf. She looked at the elder woman. Tell me what to do, Celine said. The elder breathed out slowly. Walk to the center of the yard, the real center, the old stone, the one with the carved seal that's been there longer than the building. Stand on it. Let it come. Let what come? What's already coming, the old woman said. It's been coming for 20 years, since the forest, since you were a child walking in your sleep toward something that already knew your name. It just needs you to stop walking away from it. Celine stood there for one more second. In that second, she was still the woman who scrubbed floors before dawn, who ate from discard piles, who had wrapped her hands in old cloth and kept the split on her palm clean with cold water from the courtyard well, who had learned not to catalog pain because pain has arithmetic, and the arithmetic was ruinous, who had survived 17 kinds of erasure and come out of every one of them still herself, still standing, still doing the next thing that needed doing. She let herself be that woman for one more second. Then she walked toward the yard. The silver wolves moved with her, all 4. The hall parted. The cold air hit her when she stepped through the outer door, and above her the sky had cleared. Clouds gone, the full moon direct and unmediated, the kind of moonlight that doesn't leave shadows. The old stone was exactly where the elder had said. She had walked past it 100 times. She had never once looked at it directly. She looked at it now. The carved seal at its center was the same shape as the marks on her arms. She stepped onto it. The marks went from warmth to light. Actual, visible light, the same silver white as the eyes of the ancient wolves, as the tree line erupting 3 minutes ago, as the thing she'd felt in the deep forest when she was a child that she had spent 20 years telling herself she didn't remember. She remembered. The light came through her skin from inside, the way the elder had said. Not consuming, not destroying, correcting. The bone setting. The long wrong thing finding its right position. She stood on the old stone in the moonlight, and the ancient wolves raised their heads around her, and the light went up, and the marks finished their arrival, and Celine Vera stopped being the woman who had survived Black Hollow and became the thing that Black Hollow had always, without knowing it, been built around. Inside the hall, the elder woman looked at the empty doorway for a long moment. "It's done," the old woman said quietly. "Is she—" Kyle started. "She's fine." The elder turned to look at him with ancient, measured eyes. "The question isn't whether she's fine. The question is whether you are prepared for what she is now." Through the open doorway, the light from the yard was extraordinary. All the silver wolves were howling. The sound moved out through the walls of Black Hollow, across the territory, north toward the forest, and east toward the river, and west toward the 7 Alpha territories that had sent 4 hunters to end a bloodline. The sound told them they were too late. Kael stood at the edge of the doorway and looked out at the woman standing on the old stone with the light coming through her skin, and felt, for the first time in his life, in 6 years of carrying a title that had never once made him uncertain, the specific vertiginous sensation of a man who does not know what comes next. He had always known what came next. He had always been the thing that the room oriented toward, the fixed point, the weight at the center. It was the only version of himself he had ever occupied. The woman in the yard turned and looked at him, and he understood, in his body before his mind could form the argument, that the fixed point had moved. Everything was about to be built again from the ground up. He wasn't sure he deserved to be part of what got built. He wasn't sure for the first time that was his call to make. The light faded slowly, the way dawn fades, not switching off but receding, becoming internal, settling back under the skin where it lived now as something permanent rather than something emergent. Celine stepped off the old stone. The yard was cold. The moon was still full and direct, and the silver wolves had gone quiet, arranged in a loose perimeter around the yard's edge, patient in the way they were always patient. The patience of things that have been waiting long enough that patience has become indistinguishable from nature. She looked at her hands. The marks ran all this way now. Wrists, forearms, inner elbows, up past her shoulders, and she could feel the farthest edges at her collarbone, at the base of her neck, threading toward the crest below her right ear that had been warm her entire life. The split on her right palm was gone. Not healed, gone, as if it hadn't been there. The skin was clean and unmarked except for the silver lines that weren't quite lines. She was aware of the compound in the eastern cistern the way she was aware of a sound in the next room. Not with her ears. With something that didn't have a name in the vocabulary she'd grown up with. A wrongness, directional and specific. She could feel the cistern the way you feel a bruise before you touch it. The location of the damage, the radius of it. She walked toward it. Kael fell into step beside her. She didn't ask him to. He didn't announce himself. He was simply there, on her left, which was where he had positioned himself in the doorway, and which was, she noted this without sentiment, without attaching more weight to it than it carried, the position of a man who has decided something and is acting on the decision without requiring acknowledgement. "You know where the cistern is," he said. "East Maintenance Yard, behind the grain stores. You know this because—" "I cleaned the access gate 6 weeks ago. There was a rust problem on the hinges." He was quiet for 3 steps. Of course there was. The main hall door was behind them, the ceremony's wreckage still inside, the elder wolves and the elders and Seraphine in custody, and 2 hunters restrained with kitchen rope, and the whole fractured evening sitting in that room waiting to be processed. She did not think about any of it. Processing was for after. Right now there was a compound in the water and a direction to walk, and she walked it. The East Maintenance Yard was unlocked. Bad sign. It should have been latched. The rust problem had been fixed and the latch replaced, and someone had been through since. She pushed the gate and it swung, and the yard beyond was dark. The grain stores cast long shadows from the moonlight. The cistern was in the far corner, a stone structure about chest height with an iron access cover she'd always found heavy. The access cover was open. She crossed the yard fast, Kael behind her, and looked into the cistern. The water below was wrong, not visibly. It looked like water, moved like water, had the dark flat surface of water in the dark. But the wrongness she'd felt since stepping off the stone was concentrated here, a dense sourness that registered in her jaw and her chest simultaneously. Something had been introduced to the water that didn't belong in it. She knew, without anyone telling her, what to do. She put both hands in the water. The cold hit first, deep cold, the cistern's winter temperature. Then the wrongness running up her arms, the compound recognizing something, or her body recognizing the compound, the same way an immune system recognizes an invader. The marks on her arms went white hot. Not pain. Something that pain was made from, something below pain's threshold, operating at a more foundational register. She held it. Kyle was at her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth off his arm. He did not touch her. He watched the water. The surface began to change, not dramatically, not a Hollywood moment, not light and spectacle. Slowly, the way water clears when a particulate settles. The wrongness in her jaw lessened. In her chest, the marks cooled by degrees, returning from white-hot to warm to the baseline warmth that was their resting state now, apparently permanent. She pulled her hands out. The skin was clean. The water below was clean. She stood up straight and looked at the open access cover and thought about the mechanism the hunter had used to deliver the compound, some kind of slow-release device designed to work while the hall was occupied, while everyone was watching the ceremony, while the pack's attention was organized and pointed in a single direction. Misdirection. The whole night had been misdirection. "It's clear," she said. "You're sure?" "Yes." He looked at the water for a moment, then at her. "How?" "I don't have the vocabulary for it yet," she said. "I know what it felt like. I don't have the words." "That's honest." "I try to be." He was still looking at her. The moonlight was direct and it did not flatter. It showed the cut on his jaw and the one at his temple and the dried blood and the torn shoulder and the lines around his eyes that 6 years of alpha responsibility had written there. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been tested very thoroughly tonight and was still standing, which said something specific about what was structural in him versus what was performance. He said, "I need you to hear something." "I'm listening." "What was done to you?" "The placement, your mother, 3 years of this house. I didn't order it. I didn't know the specifics, but I created conditions where it was possible, where people around me could make those choices, and I would not look too hard at the mechanism because the mechanism produced stability, and stability was what I was optimizing for." He held her gaze. "That's not innocence, that's a different kind of fault." She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was significant now that the urgency had moved through. She could feel it in her hands, in her face. "I know the difference," she said, "between a man who built the cage and a man who locked the door." "I'm not asking you to. I know what you're not asking." She held his gaze. "I'll decide what I think about all of it when there's time. Right now there are 7 alpha territories that funded tonight and 2 hunters in your hall who know things, and an elder who needs to tell me things, and a pack that may or may not have drunk from the eastern cistern before I cleared it. 4 families in the outer quarters use this cistern," he said. "Night water. The kitchen staff draws from the western line." She closed her eyes briefly. 4 families. She did the math she always did. Not sentiment, logistics. The compound had a progression. How long had it been in the water before she cleared it? How much would 4 families at night water weight have consumed? "I need to see them," she said. "Now?" "Now." He didn't argue. He closed the access cover on the cistern and latched it, and they crossed the maintenance yard and went to the outer quarters. The outer quarters were quiet with the quiet of sleeping families. The kind of quiet that is the goal of all the work she'd done for 3 years. The underpinning of daily life that nobody notices when it's working. 4 families, 3 homes, the interconnected outer buildings that made up the residential section furthest from the main house. Children's shoes outside 2 of the doors. Firewood stacked with the particular care of people who knew winter. She went door to door, knocked, waited, came in when invited, navigated the sleepy, alarmed responses of people who were not used to a knock at this hour, and especially not used to the alpha being the one doing the knocking. She checked each person with the same hand she'd used in the cistern, not touching, just proximity, just the marks doing their directional sensing, and found what she found. 2 adults in the second house. A woman named Pell, who worked kitchen prep, and her husband, older, a maintenance man named Rue. They'd had night water 2 hours ago. The compound was in them, but not advanced. Early stage, not yet past the threshold where it became lethal. At the stage where it was suppressible. She put her hands on the table between them, not on them, and held the sense of it, and did the same thing she'd done in the cistern. The wrongness localized, concentrated in her awareness, and then cleared. Not like magic, like the body fighting something it had been given the tools to fight. Pell looked at her hands on the table and then up at her face and said nothing for a long moment. "What was in the water?" Rue said. "Something that shouldn't have been," Celine said. "It's handled." "Are we—" "You're fine," she said, and meant it. She could feel that it was true the same way she could feel the marks on her arms, as information, specific and reliable. Pell was still looking at her face, then at her arms. The marks were visible in the lamplight, the silver lines running full length, the crest at her neck. "The stories," Pell said quietly, "the ones the old women tell." Celine looked at her. "My grandmother used to say the wolves had a mother," Pell said, "that she'd come back when the packs needed it most." Celine held her gaze. "I'm just someone who grew up near the forest." "Sure," Pell said. She said it the way people say things they don't believe but will let pass because some truths don't need to be argued into a room. They left. 3 families clear. The 4th house showed no exposure, hadn't drawn night water yet, which was luck or timing or whatever word you prefer for the narrowness by which bad things sometimes miss. She stood in the outer yard after. The moon had moved. Less direct now, more diffuse, the particular quality of moon past midnight. Kael stood beside her and they both looked at the main house, lit up from inside with the activity of an evening that was still sorting itself out. Inside that house, 2 hunters in custody, Seraphine in custody, the elders, the Riverpack delegation, the Silver Wolves who had apparently decided the hall was acceptable temporary territory, the rest of Black Hollow's pack shaken, re-ranking internally in the fast, instinctive way that wolves recalibrate when an authority structure is disrupted, and 7 alpha territories somewhere beyond the walls, now aware that their operation had failed. Now aware that the bloodline they'd paid to eliminate was not only alive but fully activated. Now calculating their next move with the specific urgency of people who had committed to a course of action and could not cleanly uncommit. "They'll come," she said. "Yes," Kael said. "Not tonight. Tonight they're finding out what happened. Tomorrow they start planning." "How long do we have?" She looked at the tree line to the north. The Silver Wolves were visible at the edge. Not in the yard, not in the main house, out at the boundary, distributed along the edge of Black Hollow's territory in a perimeter that had not been there this morning. She could feel them the same way she could feel the cistern, the same directional awareness, points of presence. "Long enough," she said. "If we move fast." "Tell me what you need," he said. She looked at him. The directness of the question, no architecture around it, no strategic positioning, no alpha managing a conversation toward a predetermined outcome. Just a man asking a woman what she needed. From him. In good faith. 3 years she had lived in this house. 3 years of reading currents, of watching this man move through rooms, of filing observations in the careful archive she kept of everything. She had a thorough record of Kael Draven's capacity for cruelty by omission, for willful blindness, for the comfortable negligence of a man so certain of his own centrality that he'd never had to reckon with what the edges of his order felt like. She also had a record of the moment in the secondary chamber when he'd said her name for the first time and didn't know why. Of tonight on the dais, the hand closing and opening. Of the yard outside the north gate when he'd called her name with the full weight of something he'd run out of room to contain. People were not their worst moments. She had lived by this principle in the most literal possible sense, had applied it to herself with ruthless consistency, had refused to become the sum of what had been done to her. She could not hold it as a principle for herself and deny it to everyone else. That wasn't integrity. That was just inventory management. "I need the Elder Wolves in the war room in 1 hour," she said. "I need the Riverpack delegation, Davin Ashcroft specifically, offered a seat at that table. I need your 2 fastest runners out before dawn with a message to every pack inside 3 territories." What message? That Black Hollow stands, that the first line is confirmed, that any pack that sends runners in the next 48 hours rather than hunters will be received as allies. She paused. and that any pack that sends hunters after that will deal with every ancient wolf between here and the northern ridge. Kael was quiet for a moment. She watched him process it. The political dimensions, the territorial implications, the challenge to 7 alpha powers who had just failed at eliminating a bloodline and would be making the same calculation she was making right now, each from their own side. "You're giving them an exit," he said. "I'm giving them a door," she said. "What they do with it is their problem. Some of them won't take it. No, some of them will send hunters. And when they do," she looked at the tree line, the silver wolves distributed along it in the dark. Patient, present. "I'll handle it," she said. Not arrogance, logistics. The same tone she'd used for 6 hours of floor scrubbing, for 3 years of the survival arithmetic of the lowest-ranked member of a brutal pack. Matter of fact. The next thing that needs doing. She turned and walked toward the main house. She walked through the door without waiting to be let in, and through the main corridor and into the great hall, which rearranged itself around her arrival the way it had done with Kael for years. The instinctive orientation, the attention pulled by something the body registers before the mind names it. She looked at the room, at the assembled elders and the silver wolves and the packmates kneeling and Seraphine standing still in the center of it. She looked at Seraphine. Seraphine looked back. "You were right," Celine said. "I was never supposed to exist." Seraphine's jaw was set. "I know what you're going to do." "Do you?" "You're going to be merciful," Seraphine said. The word carried its full weight of contempt. "You're going to spare me. Make some grand gesture. Show the pack what a mother does compared to what the rest of us do. It's theater." Celine held her gaze for a long moment. "I'm going to put you somewhere you can't run an operation from," she said. "Not for theater. Because you know who the 7 packs used as intermediaries, and I need those names, and the only way I get them is if you're in a room where your options are talking or sitting. That's not mercy. That's use." A pause. "Whether it becomes mercy later depends entirely on you." Something moved through Seraphine's face, a fractional recalibration, the same one from the corridor earlier but deeper. She was reprocessing Celine again, updating the model, revising the threat assessment. "You're not what I expected," Seraphine said. "No," Celine agreed, "I'm not." The elder woman stepped forward. "There's still the matter of the declaration," she said. The ceremony was disrupted. Pack law requires resolution. The hall went sharp with attention. "The Alpha's declaration stands interrupted," the old woman continued. "By pack protocol, it must be completed or formally withdrawn within 3 days. Both options require the Alpha's presence and confirmation." She looked at Kael, then at Celine. "There is also the matter of the first line's formal position in the pack hierarchy, which has not been established in living memory, and which will require deliberation." "One thing at a time," Celine said. "Agreed," the elder said, "but the clock runs." Celine turned to Kael. He was standing at the edge of the room, which was not where he usually stood. He stood at the center. He had moved to the edge, she registered, sometime between the outer quarters and now. Had seated the center without appearing to notice he'd done it. He noticed her noticing. He held her gaze. "The war room," she said. 1 hour. "I'll have Castor." He started, then stopped. Closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. "I'll have Vice set it up." She nodded. She moved toward the corridor that led to the elder wolves' quarters, because there were things she needed from the old woman before the war room, and the old woman had been waiting long enough to deserve the asking first. She was 3 steps into the corridor when she heard the perimeter alarm. Not a bell. Black Hollow didn't use bells. A system of horns, graduated, designed to carry different information in different combinations. The one she heard now was 3 notes, descending. She'd never heard it before. She looked at Kael. His face had gone to the flat, complete blankness of a man under a threat he hadn't finished identifying. "What is that?" she said. "Northern perimeter," he said. "Mass approach." "How many?" The horn sounded again. 3 notes descending, twice. "That's the signal for an organized force," Kael said. His voice had changed, the processing quality gone. This was the alpha voice, the operational one, stripped to its essential function. Not hunters, wolves, multiple packs. He looked at her. 7 territories, he said. They weren't waiting to find out what happened. They already knew. She understood immediately. The hunters tonight hadn't been the plan. The hunters had been a contingency. The plan, the real plan, the one that ran underneath the ceremony and the compound and Seraphine's 18 months of positioning, was an organized force at the northern perimeter, timed to arrive after the compound had done its work, after the pack was down, after the bloodline was ended. The compound hadn't been in time. She had cleared it. The bloodline was not ended. But the organized force was already here, already at the perimeter. The timing didn't change because the contingency had failed. She stood in the corridor and felt the silver wolves along the northern edge, felt them clearly, points of presence in the dark, and counted. 4 in the yard, 4 at the perimeter, the number she could feel. She could feel further. She'd been doing it unconsciously since stepping off the old stone, the marks doing their sensing. She reached for it deliberately now, the same way she'd reached for the cistern's wrongness, the same directional attention, and she felt the forest. Not 4, not 8. Something considerably larger. Something that had been in that forest for a very long time, deep in the section she didn't remember, but her body did, waiting with the patience of things that had waited for 20 years already, and could wait until the moment was exactly right. The moment was exactly right. She looked at Kael. Get your pack into formation. Every wolf who can stand. We're outnumbered. You are, she said. I'm not. She moved toward the main doors and felt, behind her without looking, the entire hall begin to move in her wake. Not following an order, following something more structural than an order, something the body does before the mind finishes the argument. Outside, the horn was still sounding. The northern forest was about to answer, and Celine Vera, who had scrubbed this hall's floor before dawn, who had wrapped her hands in old cloth and done the survival arithmetic for 3 years in cold blood, who had eaten from discard piles and been invisible among people who breathed the same air, walked through the main doors of Black Hollow into the night air with the ancient marks running full length on her skin and the ancient wolves rising in the forest ahead of her, and felt, for the first time in her life, the specific and irreversible sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Behind her, Kael was 3 steps back. She could feel his presence without looking the same way she'd felt everything else tonight. Directional, specific, certain. She did not slow down. She said without turning, "Stay close." She felt him close the distance to 1 step. The northern perimeter flared with movement, and the last quiet moment before everything broke open stretched itself to its limit and snapped. The northern perimeter broke open the way a dam breaks. Not all at once, but at the point of greatest pressure first, then everywhere simultaneously. Celine crossed the outer yard at a run and hit the northern gate and went through it into the open ground between the main walls and the forest edge. And what she saw stopped her for exactly 1 second. The 1 second the mind requires to absorb something it has no prior category for. The organized force was real. 7 packs, or the forward elements of 7 packs. Wolves in shift, wolves in the partial form that fighting required, moving out of the western tree line in a spread that was designed to flank rather than assault directly. Organized. Coordinated. Someone had drilled this. Someone had spent time on the logistics of taking Black Hollow in the window after the compound did its work, and the professionalism of it was visible in the way they moved, in the absence of noise, in the controlled spread. There were a lot of them. Behind her, Black Hollow's warriors were coming through the gate. She could hear them. The sound of boots on frozen ground, the low commands of the men organizing a defense, the particular quality of a pack that is frightened and has decided to be frightened in the direction of the fight. Kael was among them. She felt him without looking, 1 step back, the distance he'd held since the cistern. She stood at the front of the open ground and looked at what was coming and felt the marks on her arms move from warmth to something that lived past warmth. And she reached, deliberately, with the focused attention she'd used on the cistern, on the compound in Pell and Rue, on every directional sensing the marks had done since she stepped off the old stone. She reached north, into the forest, not the near edge, deeper. Past the sections with names, into the sections that had no names. The sections she'd walked as a child in the dark without fear, the sections that the boundary wolves refused to patrol and that Castor had logged in maintenance reports as inaccessible terrain. She reached, and the forest reached back. The sound started deep, sub-audible first, a vibration in the ground that moved through boot soles into bone before the ears registered anything. Then audible, then large. The ancient wolves did not howl the way Black Hollow wolves howled. The sound they made was structural, the way tectonic shifts are structural, not a noise produced by a body, but a property of the landscape rearranging itself. The forward elements of the seven-pack force slowed. The silver wolves came out of the deep forest in a wave that had no clean count. Not 4, not 8. More than that, many more, moving through the trees and into the open ground with that terrible, soundless mass that the 4 in the hall had demonstrated scaled enormously, scaled to something that redefined the available space. They came out spread across the entire northern face, more ground than the organized force had planned to cover, filling the flanking routes simultaneously, and the organized force stopped. Not broke. Stopped. There is a difference. Broke is panic. Stopped is calculation. The professional recognition that the parameters have changed, that the math no longer produces the same answer it produced an hour ago. She felt the moment the calculation shifted in the force's leadership. Felt it the same way she'd felt the cistern. Directional, specific, a pressure easing, a held thing beginning to release. She walked forward. Kale said, "Celine," behind her. Not a command. An involuntary sound, the kind you make when someone walks toward something dangerous before you can form the sentence to stop them. She kept walking. She crossed 40 feet of open ground and stopped in the space between Black Hollow's line and the organized force's front edge. The silver wolves flanked her, distributed, not a wall but a presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need to make itself a wall because it has already made itself a fact. A wolf stepped forward from the organized force, large, dark-coated, the particular bearing of a man who is used to being the most significant thing in a given space. He had stopped shifting down, was in his human form, which meant he was here to talk, or had been, or was recalculating whether talk was still the correct option. She didn't recognize him. She didn't need to. "You're the first-line heir," he said. Not a question. Flat, with the specific flatness of a man who has just had a belief confirmed that he would have preferred to remain unconfirmed. "Yes," she said. "This wasn't supposed to go this way." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." He looked at the silver wolves, looked at the marks visible on her arms in the moonlight, looked at the line of Black Hollow warriors behind her, and at Kyle standing at the front of that line, doing his math. She let him do it. "The 7 packs made a collective decision," he said finally. "It wasn't personal." "I know," she said. "It never is." A pause. He was watching her face. "What do you want?" She had thought about this in the walk across the yard, in the second before she'd started walking. She had thought about what power does when it wins. The 2 options that history demonstrated with consistency. The fork that every person who had ever held something significant eventually stood at. You can spend what you've been given on domination, on making the people who were wrong about you feel the full weight of how wrong they were. It was available to her. The ancient wolves, the marks, the compound she'd neutralized, the night she'd walked through. It was all currency, and she could spend it that way. Or, "Stand down," she said. "Go home. Send representatives to Black Hollow within the week. Not hunters, diplomats." He blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. "That's it," she said. "That's what I want. I don't want the 7 territories. I don't want to spend the next 2 years consolidating by force. I want packs that are capable of making decisions for themselves to make a better one." She held his gaze. "You came here tonight because you were afraid of what I represented. You're still afraid. That's fine. Fear is a reasonable response to something you don't understand yet, but I'm not interested in ruling through it. So go home. Send diplomats. And I will spend the next 6 months giving you reasons to be something other than afraid." The silence was extraordinary. The wolf who had stepped forward looked at her for a long time. She watched him run the calculation one more time. Threat assessment, political implication, the question of whether walking away from this was weakness or wisdom. She watched him arrive at an answer. He turned to the force behind him. "Stand down," he said. "We're going home." Not every wolf in this force heard it with the same relief. She could see the resistance in some, the men who had come here for a fight and were being denied the release of it. But the command held. The force began to pull back into the tree line, organized the way they'd come out. professional to the end. She stood in the open ground until they were gone. Then she turned and walked back toward the gate, and Black Hollow's line opened to let her through. And she walked through it and felt the weight of 100 sets of eyes, and did not look at any of them, just kept walking, through the gate, through the outer yard, through the main doors into the hall. She sat down on the floor of the great hall, not in a chair, on the floor. The same floor she had scrubbed 100 times, the same stone she knew by the grain of its surface. She sat on it cross-legged and put her hands on her knees and breathed. The exhaustion hit all at once the way it does when the urgency finally drains, complete and structural, the whole body presenting its bill simultaneously. Her hands were shaking, not badly, the small persistent tremor of a system that has been running at capacity for too long and is now accounting for it. She sat with the shaking and breathed and did not perform steadiness for the room. The elder woman sat down beside her. Not on a chair either, on the floor, with the careful deliberateness of old joints, arranging herself with quiet dignity. She folded her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead and did not speak. Celine looked at her sidelong. "You've been waiting to do that for a while." 50 years, the old woman said, give or take. A silence that was different from all the silences the night had produced. Loose, not pressurized, breathable. "Tell me what I don't know yet," Celine said. The elder was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your mother knew what you were." Celine looked straight ahead. "She took you to the deep forest every full moon because the ancient wolves needed to know you, needed to bond the recognition early, while you were young enough that it would be foundational rather than disruptive. She understood the risk. She understood that if the wrong people found out what she was doing, there would be consequences." The old woman paused. She was very brave, in the particular unglamorous way that bravery usually is, not in one dramatic moment, but sustained over years in small daily choices that nobody witnessed. Celine's jaw tightened. The shaking in her hand steadied, which was the body's way of directing resources to something more urgent than tremor management. "She knew they'd found her," the elder continued, "at the end. She knew the settlement was compromised. She left you with enough of the right absence of information. Didn't tell you what you were, didn't tell you about the forest. Let the memories sit below the accessible level, because she understood that a girl who didn't know what she carried couldn't be interrogated into revealing it. She protected you with her silence." A pause. "She also left you completely alone, which was the part she didn't have a solution to. I think she knew that too." Celine breathed. She was practical. "Yes," the elder said. "You come by it honestly." The hall was quiet around them. The silver wolves had settled, 2 in the corner near the main doors, 1 near the elder seats, 1 that had positioned itself approximately 3 feet from Celine's left, and had stayed there since the outer yard with the specific, undemonstrative constancy of a very old guardian. The fire in the hearths had burned down. The formal ceremony's trappings looked faintly absurd now. The dressed tables, the precise candle spacing, all of it arranged for something that had been overtaken by events. Kael came in. He came in through the main doors and crossed the hall and stood in front of her, and looked at her sitting on the floor, and then, without visible decision, sat down on the floor across from her. The alpha of Black Hollow on the flagstones of his own great hall, in his torn, formal black, looking at the woman who had just walked 40 feet into an organized assault force and sent it home. The elder got up and moved away with the tact of someone who has lived long enough to know which conversations need witnesses and which don't. Celine looked at Kael. He looked at her. "I'm stepping down," he said. "No, you're not," she said. The pack needs an alpha who has enough spine to sit on the floor of his own hall and tell the truth to someone he wronged," she said. "You just did that. Keep going." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was working in his face, the architecture of a man dismantling a structure that had been load-bearing for his entire adult life and trying to figure out what stays standing when it's gone. "I don't know how to be useful to you," he said. "I don't know what that looks like. Everything I know how to do, I learned in a system that treated you as furniture. I don't know how to unlearn it fast enough to not—" "Kael," she said. He stopped. "Nobody unlearns anything fast," she said. "Fast is not the standard. The standard is direction. Are you moving in the right direction or not? That's the question. Everything else is time and repetition." He held her gaze. His hands were on his knees, and they were not shaking, but they were pressed against his legs with a force that spoke of something being held carefully. "I said your name for the first time in 3 years 2 days ago," he said. "In the secondary chamber. You were changing the bedding. I said your name and I didn't know why, and I've been trying to work out why since." He paused. "I think I knew something was shifting. I think I'd known for a while and was managing the knowledge, which is what I do with things that require a change I'm not ready to make." "I know," she said. "I watched you do it. For 3 years. For 3 years." He breathed out slowly. "That's a specific kind of cruelty." "It was a specific kind of survival," she said. "I watched you very carefully because you were the weather in this house. You determined what the conditions were, and I had learned very early that you don't fight weather. You read it and you move accordingly." "You shouldn't have had to read me," he said. "You should have been able to just exist in a house without calculating whether the alpha was in a mood to—" "No," she said. "I shouldn't have. And I did anyway, and I'm still here." She held his gaze. "That's not a debt. It's just the shape of what happened. The debt is what you do from here." He looked at her for a long time with those eyes that had always been doing more than they showed. "Then tell me," he said. "Tell me what I owe." She thought about this. Honestly, without the framework of strategy, just the genuine accounting of a woman who had done her survival math for 3 years and was, for the first time, being asked to do a different kind of calculation. "You owe Pell and Rue an explanation," she said. "They drank poisoned water in your house under your watch. They won't ask for one, but they deserve it." She paused. "You owe the wolf pup in the outer quarters, the one who can't shift yet, 4 years old, a healer who doesn't treat the condition like an inconvenience. That should have been addressed a year ago." Another pause. "You owe Vice a promotion and an honest conversation about what you're going to do with the beta position going forward, because Vice held the line tonight while Castor was arrested and nobody told him anything and he held the line anyway." She looked at him. "You owe me nothing. What was done to me predates your direct knowledge. What you did indirectly, the conditions, the willful blindness, that doesn't get repaid to me personally. It gets repaid to the next person who would have ended up on the floor with the brush before dawn." He held her gaze for a long, steady moment. "That's very cold," he said. Not an accusation, almost like admiration. "That's very practical," she said. Something changed in his face. The careful management that she had watched for 3 years, the flat, controlled surface that had made him difficult to read. It moved. Not disappeared. Moved the way a face moves when a person stops performing neutrality and something real comes to the surface to breathe. "I chose wrong at the ceremony," he said. "I was going to choose Seraphine, not because I wanted to, because it was the politically functional choice, and I had been making politically functional choices for 6 years and had stopped distinguishing between them and actual choices." He paused. "I don't know what I would have chosen if none of tonight had happened. I've been trying to be honest with myself about that." "What's your honest answer?" she said. "I don't know," he said, "and that's the most honest thing I've said all night." She looked at him for a long time. There's a version of this story where she was harder than that moment required, where the 3 years of cold floors and split hands and the silence of a man who knew something was wrong and called it order anyway, where all of that accumulated into a wall that the honesty could not get over. She had the material for that wall. She had been building it a brick at a time for 3 years, and it was solid and well constructed. She thought about her mother, who had been practical about impossible things, who had understood that the choice was not between the world as it should be and the world as it was, but between the world as it was and the work of making it different, who had made that work daily, quietly, without witnesses, for years, and had done it knowing the cost and had kept the receipt and paid anyway. She thought about what the elder had said. Brave in the particular, unglamorous way, not in one dramatic moment, but sustained in small daily choices. She looked at Kael, at the cut on his jaw and the torn shoulder and the hands pressed to his knees and the face of a man who had just said, "I don't know," in the middle of his own great hall and meant it, who was standing in the rubble of the architecture he'd spent 6 years building and had not yet tried to rebuild the same structure from the same materials. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. He blinked. "Whether you'd have chosen differently," she said. "Ask me again in 6 months. When I've watched you do the work and you've watched me do mine. When we've both seen what the other is actually made of in ordinary time, not crisis time. She held his gaze. Crisis shows you who a person is when the walls are on fire. Ordinary time shows you who they are when the fire's out. I've already seen you in the fire. And, he said. And you stood in it, she said simply. That counts. He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the hearth had burned down to coals, the hall lit now by a warm, low light that was easier than the ceremony's formal candelabras. The silver wolf near her left had moved. At some point in the conversation, it had settled fully onto the stone, massive head on massive paws, watching with those water-over-ice eyes with the patience of something that had been waiting 20 years and was now, apparently, not in any hurry to be anywhere else. 6 months, Kael said. 6 months, she confirmed. Dawn came the way dawn comes regardless of what the previous night contained. Indifferently, incrementally, the dark finding its edge and pulling back from it. The first light came through the great hall's eastern windows in long, pale bars across the floor, across the aged stone she knew by grain and grout, and Celine sat in it and felt the marks on her arms settle into their permanent state, warm, present, as ordinary as her own heartbeat. Extraordinary things become ordinary. This was a law. You live inside the remarkable long enough, and it becomes the weather. And then you navigate it the way you navigate all weather, which is just the next thing that needs doing. She got up, slowly, with the full weight of a body that had been asked for a great deal in a very short period, and was now presenting its account in detail. She stood in the bar of morning light and looked at the hall, at the silver wolves at rest in the corners, at the elder seats still holding the formal arrangement of ceremony, at the great doors closed now, the outside gone quiet after everything the night had contained, at the burned-down hearths and the overturned chair near the River Pack delegation's position, and the dark stain on the stone near the main doors where a hunter had gone down. She had cleaned this hall 100 times. She would clean it again. The difference was that this morning she would decide what it looked like when the work was done. Kael stood up beside her. They stood in the morning light in the empty hall and looked at the work ahead. Not metaphorically, actually, the hall in front of them, needing to be put back into order the same way the pack needed to be put back into order, the same way the territory's political reality needed to be rebuilt from the ground up, everything requiring the same thing. The next thing that needed doing, done without ceremony and without waiting for conditions to be perfect, because conditions were never perfect, and waiting for them taught you to be passive, and she had been passive long enough. The elders need to meet before the pack sees them, she said. There are things the pack needs to hear from them directly. I'll have Vice call it, he said. The River Pack delegation should be there. Devon Ashcroft. He held his delegation in a defensive line last night while the room went chaotic. He was the only visiting delegate who did. That's information about his character. Agreed, Kael said. And Castor. He was quiet for one beat. What about him? She looked at the doors. He loved this pack. He made choices out of that love that were wrong. Badly wrong. Wrong in ways that can't be fully undayed. But the root of it was the pack's survival. I'm not going to tell you what to do with him. He was your beta. That's your call. She turned and looked at him. But I want to hear what he has to say before anything is decided, specifically about what he knows about the 7 territories and the records my family kept. She paused. He's the last person alive who knows all of it. That has value. Kael held her gaze. The morning light was doing something specific to his face, removing the shadow the fire had cast, showing the full version. He looked older in the morning. Not worse. More true. You're not what I thought you were, he said. You didn't think about me much, she said. No, he said. I know. A pause. I'm trying to work out how a person makes that right. You start by stopping treating it like a debt that can be cleared, she said. It's not a debt. It's a direction. You move in the right direction every day and you don't keep score because keeping score is just another way of making it about you. She turned toward the corridor that led to the elder quarters. I'll be in the war room in an hour. She was almost to the corridor when she heard him say her name. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the great hall with the morning light coming through the eastern windows behind him, in his torn, formal black, the alpha of Black Hollow. and he looked like a man who has just found solid ground after a long time in water and is not yet certain it will hold but is putting his weight on it anyway. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving." She looked at him for a moment. "I had nowhere left to go," she said. "For a long time that was the only reason." She held his gaze. "It isn't anymore." She turned and walked down the corridor toward the elder quarters, toward the work that was waiting, toward the 7 territories that would send diplomats or hunters in the coming weeks and would learn what she was made of in ordinary time, toward the wolf pup in the outer quarters who needed a healer, toward Pell and Rue, who deserved an explanation, toward the pack that had treated her as furniture for 3 years and was about to learn that furniture, when it turns out to be the foundation, tends to dictate the terms of reconstruction. Behind her, in the great hall, the morning light continued to arrive, bar by bar, increment by increment, indifferent to the previous night and interested only in the day, which was as it should be, which was the only way anything ever got built. The ancient wolves outside raised their heads to the dawn. Black Hollow, which had never once in its history been what it claimed to be, began, for the first time, the work of becoming it.